Hi, everybody. My name is Clint Wyckoff, and I'm an AWS Enterprise Support Manager. As an Enterprise Support Manager, I help lead a team of TAMs that are responsible for delivering entitlements around operational best practices and things of that nature to our enterprise support customers. Welcome to AWS Supports You. We're glad you've taken a few minutes out of your day to join us. Here at AWS Supports You, we gather experts who focus on providing you with tips to optimize performance and lower your costs in the cloud. Today, I'm joined by Rob Higuerita from AWS Enterprise Support. Rob, welcome to AWS Supports You.
Thanks, Clint. Appreciate it. So, my name is Rob Higuerita. I'm a Principal Technical Account Manager located in Austin, Texas, and happy to be here today with the show. Thanks, Clint.
Fantastic, Rob, and it's good to have you back again. So here at AWS Supports You, like we said, we focus on giving best practice tips and things of that nature from the field within enterprise support. If you're interested in learning more about AWS Premium Support and the different offerings, feel free to click the link that we're going to drop in the chat here momentarily. So, Rob, today we're going to be focusing on understanding and reducing your EC2 costs. Before we get to the agenda for today, a note to the attendees online, please feel free to utilize the chat option off to your right-hand side here. We're interested in not only hearing your questions that you have as we go along here today, but we're also interested in hearing where you're going to be joining us from also. So please feel free to drop that in the chat. As long as we get through the questions and things, Rob and I will answer those live for you. So Rob, we are going to be talking about understanding and reducing EC2 costs. Want to give us a rundown of the agenda and things that we're going to go through?
Sure. Thanks, Clint. Yeah, so we're going to be covering understanding and reducing your EC2 costs. We're also going to look a little bit more into answering this question from repost that we got as well. A little less on specific EC2 costs, but a little bit more on the understanding of AWS costs. So this user says they've terminated all of their EC2, but their estimated costs have been increasing every day. And they kind of want to understand how they can check, what the daily consumption item is for the accounts. So that's what we're going to kind of look at here to try and address this question. We're going to cover a little bit more on just understanding AWS spend in general, how you can really, kind of peel the onion back with Cost Explorer by, using some of the available filters and such in it, and go through that. So, of course, one of the things we've covered before in the show plenty of times, and we're going to drop some links into some previous episodes as well, is kind of the different tools and services on how to manage your costs in AWS. And specifically, we've spoken before about doing the see, run, plan, and save. And today we're going to cover a little bit of see and a little bit of save. So going through the front and the back side here of these two offerings that we have for being able to visibly see costs through Cost Explorer, and then how we're going to kind of cover a few savings items as well. So we spent some time before looking really briefly at Cost Explorer. So as I mentioned today, we're going to spend a little bit more time going into Cost Explorer and kind of looking at the different filters that we have. If you're not familiar with Cost Explorer, it's the AWS tool that we have to be able to visually see your spend. That has happened inside of your AWS account. So it's not going to be for estimating. It's going to be for things that have already been spent in your account for you to get a view of it. If you wanted to be able to view, what something would potentially cost, then you would end up using the AWS calculator or the estimator for that to be able to deliver things. Another option we have, and we've covered this as well in the past, is cost and usage reports. And we'll provide a link to a little bit about how to get the cost and usage report set up. We went over the cloud intelligence dashboards that we have as well that you can layer on top of your cost and usage reports. But as a basic, cost and usage reports, raw data about your AWS spend that has a great amount of detail that you could then query on top using services like Athena in order to be able to kind of do some SQL queries against that data and understand your spend in an even more granular approach because you can apply whatever dimensions you want through your SQL queries using cost and usage reports. So we're going to cover Cost Explorer primarily because for those who may be newer to AWS, or even companies that have been using AWS for a while, may not have a lot of experience in really keeping track of their AWS spend. I've had customers in the past that I've worked with that either have people that are new into AWS, they've been in like IT finance for a while, but dealing with on-premise, right? Like not being able to look at the spend live within their account. And with Cost Explorer, we're able to give you that view of your AWS costs based on usage. And it's a free tool for you to be able to do so. You can also leverage these things like reserved instance, savings plan utilization reports, recommendations for reserved instance and savings plans, be able to monitor and optimize your spend by using that information that you find, and really be able to look up, your costs retroactively, and we'll show you what that kind of looks like as well. But overall, Cost Explorer is going to be that kind of pane of glass for you to be able to get in there and view. And if you haven't seen it before, this is kind of a screenshot of what it looks like. We're going to spend more time in the actual console going over and showing what this kind of can be used. But here we just have kind of a basic view of looking at Cost Explorer and how it's going to kind of be looked at for viewing your AWS spend. You can change your granularity. You can add things to specific services. So here we say we've got CloudWatch. Wanted to cover this a little bit because we do have some customers sometimes, at least I've had in the past, and I'm guessing Clint probably has potentially as well, being a former technical account manager. Say a customer has a third-party monitoring that they implement, and it does a lot of get metric requests to your AWS account to, of course, monitor your application for you as well and provide some application insights. One of the questions we get from customers sometimes is, how do I know what the increase is of my new monitoring solution? Well, a lot of it's going to be in those CloudWatch get metric, right, data. You can leverage Cost Explorer to be able to come in, limit it to just CloudWatch, and then be able to see things like this put log events, this metric storage data, or if you had a lot of get metrics, which this one doesn't, you'd be able to see the get metric data as well. So you can kind of go back and be able to help your customer as a TAM, that's what we like to do, or tell your IT organization for yourself, what the actual increase has been. So want to get into the demo real quickly. Before I do that, Clint, just want to see if there's any questions from the audience so far. We'll get into a little demo.
Yes, Rob. So we did have a question come through, and there's one I was going to ask you as well. But first, we'll start off with Dragon Knight H3. Thanks for joining us today on AWS Support You, right? So Dragon Knight wants to know, how did you all best learn the most appropriate machine for the appropriate task for the most appropriate cost? Right. So basically around right sizing. Did it just come over time and experience? So I'll let you answer that one first, Rob, and then I'll throw in my 2 cents on it.
Great. So if you've looked at the different variety of EC2 instance families that we have, each one of them kind of has a purpose. They can be used for multiple of those purposes, but we have like T instances, which are burstable instances. They're generally for kind of some lower compute, lower networking bound type of workloads, but they work really well for a number of different things. We have M instances that are just kind of another general purpose class as well. We have C that are compute optimized, R that are memory optimized. And so depending on what your workload is going to be doing will help you determine what kind of, instance type you're really going to choose. The cost optimization part is going to be kind of something we'll talk about as well as we get going through here on how, once you've kind of decided is a C instance family, like a C5, the right pick because I'm doing very compute intensive, we can help you kind of see that. So, Clint, you have some stuff to add to that as well?
Yeah, so it's a good introduction that you provided there, Rob, with the different instance families and the instance types that we have. The one thing that I would add on top of there is, around testing and having dev accounts and things of that nature, where you try out different instance types to see which ones you get the best performance from. The other thing that I would also add on top of that is utilizing the compute optimizer. So within an AWS account, this is something you can opt into, Dragon Knight there. Within an AWS account, you can opt in for the compute optimizer, which it'll show some recommendations around instance sizing, so that you can maybe make better use of different instance sizes and things of that nature based on the CPU as well as the memory utilized, as long as you have the CloudWatch agent present inside the guest operating system.
Yep. Yeah, and we're going to be covering a little bit more on cost optimizer or compute optimizer and a little bit on the kind of counterpart EC2 right sizing that's in Cost Explorer as well as we get going through here. So thanks, Glenn, for that.
Yeah, the other question that I wanted to ask here, Rob, was the difference between, because you mentioned cost and usage reports and then Cost Explorer. For those that might be not all that familiar with AWS, what's the difference between the two?
So Cost Explorer is going to be a GUI that you can go into that we were just kind of seeing the screenshots, and we'll see a little bit more in the demo, where you get that AWS spend in detail that you can use filters and stuff. It's pre-built basically as an offering for you to be able to see your spend. Cost and usage reports are going to be the raw granular data of your actual, what makes up Cost Explorer, but give you access to that data. The nice thing with Cost and usage report, and we'll cover it as well too a little bit, is that with Cost and usage report, from the day you create that, you start collecting that data. So if you saw quickly on the slide before where we have 13-month look back essentially in Cost Explorer, Well, if you needed to look back, say 3 years ago from when you started your AWS account, if you created a cost and usage report from that starting point until say today, and you wanted that 3-year look back, well, you'd have that because it's essentially data that's stored in an S3 bucket that you can then query. The difference is you're not going to have a really nice GUI built on top of it initially. But if you look at the cost intelligence framework that we had dropped some links to as well, you'll be able to kind of build a GUI that you can use that's really powerful on top of cost and usage reports to give you really granular detail into your AWS spend.
Yeah, so the cost intelligence link that I had posted there earlier in the chat, that would leverage QuickSight, where you can create basically it would read off the cost and usage data set within QuickSight and allow you to create dashboards and things that really make the data within the cost and usage report much more visually appealing.
Yeah. Yeah, just trying to read cost and usage reports themselves, just a lot of text. If you'd like to play with
Yeah.
Excel a lot, you can actually query it and export it. But nice when you can set it up in QuickSight as well.
Cool. That wraps up the questions for now, Rob.
Okay, great. Thanks. Appreciate it. And yeah, please make sure to post your questions as we're going through here. So we're going to jump into the console real quickly and show you a little bit about Cost Explorer and how I like to slice and dice spend, and have given kind of some tutorials to customers on doing so as well. So when you first launch into Cost Explorer, this is going to be what you kind of see as your overall view. You're going to be able to see kind of your current month spend, your forecasted month spend. You get a little bit of additional information below that as well, right? On your, whether it's up, your usage of the last month. We can see mine's increased a little bit. And then we have our trends over here as well. I like to take a little opportunity to look at these trends and see some of the things that have increased or, decreased and changed such within my AWS accounts. As we can see over here, Amazon Route 53 costs are up, $51. It's 1,077%. So that may seem like it's up a ton, right? It's because I was doing some testing. If you watched the previous episode that we did on Route 53 resiliency in your application, it was all built in these accounts. And so we see some of the cost that's reflective of that testing in the environment there. You can see individual account increases. You can see region usage. You can see some of this data here, but we're going to jump into this actual view of real Cost Explorer. That's going to be where you can start slicing and dicing the data and information. So we can see here a date range, and then we see kind of the usage per those days. As you see here, we've got a couple filters that are already applied by default. And this is really just taking out the refunds and the credits from being viewed in your account, just so you see what your actual spend is without those already applied. Some companies will want to see it with that, so you can see that within there, right? So we've got the charge type, we've got refund credit. We can change our view over here, and we can see things like monthly, we can see daily, or we can see hourly. And I'll show you a little bit later the little pop-up that'll come up, but hourly wise, you're going to get a scope change on what you have available. So here we have a few different options as far as dates that we can filter by. We can do, say, the last 3 months worth of our information to see. So we can click apply, and we can see a few months worth of trends. We can go to daily and see over the course of that month those daily. Or when we switch over to hourly, as I mentioned before, we get this hourly resource granularity pop-up that says, hey, hourly resource granularity, reduce your data set to the past 14 days. It's just be a lot of data for us to keep within Cost Explorer to show you, say, the last month or the last 60 days worth of usage at the hourly granularity. Plus, it'd be really hard to just see in general here within the interface because everything would be very, very tiny, right? So I want to make sure it's usable for you. So that's why we just have the limitation in place there to be able to see that. So if you click OK, it will change my scope. And we'll see that I have my regular usage here, and I have these spikes every hour. And so kind of to address the question about, EC2 usage and what's driving up my cost, I want to take an opportunity to look at these kind of what seems like might be a little bit of an anomaly here with this every hour, this spike, and help to peel back that onion again and look back and really kind of dive into the overall spend. So we can see I've got these different spikes that happen pretty much every hour. And maybe I want to start to kind of understand what those are. This would be helpful when you're trying to review just where any cost is coming from. Now I can go ahead and I can click on this group by up at the top in Cost Explorer. And instead of just being overall spend, now I get to see it broken down by service. And in this case, I can see directory services, EC2 other, EC2 instances, VPC, transfer family, and then others. Now, my spike is happening in others, which again, maybe leads me to not know what service that is. I have my top 5 spenders here, but others is just everything else. I could use this down here below, which is a spreadsheet essentially of all the different services and what they cost here, right, per day. And I can use this to kind of see all this data, but it's kind of a lot. I could download it to a CSV and then again manipulate that in Excel or something like that, another spreadsheet editor to view the data. Or I can do something in Cost Explorer that I typically like to do, and that's start to filter out things that I don't want to see so that I can see that next layer of data down underneath, my top 5 spend. And so I may implement and use this where I'll say, okay, I've got all this data. I really need to understand and see the spend. So now I'm going to start using some of these filters over here to be able to go down and say, let's exclude something. So if I wanted to say exclude directory services, since it's my top, I could top that and just do that. But I'm going to choose the top 5. So I'm just going to come in here and say, all right, let's exclude these top 5s here. I'm going to do directory service, right? My EC2 other, my EC2 instances. Let me get VPC and transfer family because those are my my top 5. And I'm going to apply an exclude filter. So this is going to exclude these from the visibility in Cost Explorer so that I can see what next is going to be, filling in the data. So now we see here I've peeled off my directory services and other top spend items. And now I'm left with the next tier down of spend in my account. And I can see here that these spikes every hour are happening from S3. And so now I maybe want to understand what in S3 is actually causing this spend to be charged every hour. Maybe if you know S3, but this is something that, is kind of there. So let's start to remove some of our filters here and go and try and dig into the S3 spend and understand exactly where this charge is coming from. I just want to say, as we're going through this, this applies to a variety of different services. Same thing I mentioned before, like CloudWatch in the slides. We can use CloudWatch as a service here and, get the same kind of information. Just digging into S3 because it happens to be a spike in my account. And so I want to understand. So I'm going to change that to include so that we include only S3. And I'm going to filter to that. And now we can see that I've got S3, right? I'm used by the service, but now I need to figure out what it is. So again, I'm going to use the group by at the top, and I'd be able to see that it's my time storage byte hours. So if you're familiar with S3 or not familiar with S3, billing done, of course, by the hour for the data that you have stored within a storage class. And so this is time storage byte hours that every hour is having this charge, right, within the account. So now I know by kind of peeling back and looking through different bits of the layers, what's there. I can change it and see specifically what storage class it is, that it's standard storage by going to the API operation. And I can see kind of the other, items that are here as well as far as storage length put object. But as we see here, each one of these spikes is all standard storage. So kind of a few different items. We can see all the other things down here below, but quite a bit of data that we have available to us by using these different group by options. So been talking a lot so far, got a little bit more in this demo, but wanted to just quickly take a second and see if there's any questions from the audience. So we're not just listening to me talk for a while here.
No, it's very interesting. At least I think it is. So one of my favorite features that might not necessarily get as much usage by customers is actually the download CSV. So once you go through and you're creating your visualizations and things within Cost Explorer and you got your filters and all that, you can actually export the entire chart. So the download to CSV takes that entire chart that's on the bottom, call it, center quadrant third of the screen there, exports it out to a CSV, and then you can create pivot tables and any custom diagrams, bar charts, pie charts for anybody that's interested in viewing the information. So I think that's very, very useful. And there was a question from RoboChris. It wasn't directly around Cost Explorer itself, but they are interested in knowing, Rob, how did you make your screen dark?
Sorry, it is a Tamper Monkey script that is making it dark. It is not the console itself. So apologies. I like to have my screen dark to save my eyes. So
yeah, so it is an extension there.
Yes.
Cool. So that's the only question that had come across. But I did want to call out that the download to CSV, the other item that you called out there, Rob, that I thought was pretty cool was the exclude option. So you can exclude specific, whether it be like categories or services. Yeah, very, very useful stuff to get at the information that is important to you and your business.
Yeah, definitely. As you're digging into things, it's very helpful to be able to exclude or just include only specific services like we did, and then use the usage group by, right, to see some of that granular data and stuff. And we'll continue kind of looking through the console a little bit more into that, and then kind of look at some of the other things that are here in Cost Explorer as well. But thanks, Ben.
Definitely.
Keep questions coming. All right. So we looked at a few different group buys, and say we want to see specifically what account this is coming from now, right? So we saw what the service is, we saw what the storage is. Now we want to identify, which group is essentially spending this S3 storage. Well, again, we can leave it on S3 filter that we did already previously for the service. We already know that that's the service that's incurring the cost. But now we can use the group by linked account. We can see that I have 3 different accounts in this organization. And this Rob Hagrita account, my main account, is the one that's using S3. And so now we've been able to kind of identify which account specifically, what service, even specifically what usage type within that service is actually incurring the spend. So really hope this helps to answer the AWS user on repost. This question about identifying some of the spend and where it may be coming from inside of their account if they did turn off EC2 instances. I also want to call it specifically to help answer that question, right? If you stop an EC2 instance, you're not charged for the actual compute any longer. But if you do have EBS volumes that are still there because the instance is stopped, you are still charged for the EBS volumes themselves. So just want to make sure that, as you're going through looking at the spend, understanding what you get charged for per hour on EC2 instance, that's going to go into some of the costs you might see as well. And so kind of specifically looking into that, we're going to go and look at some other portions within EC2 spend and look at things like EC2 instances and the EC2 other category. But we've got quite a few different options here, again, within Cost Explorer to view some of this data. So definitely take advantage of it to be able to start digging into these individual things. So let's get rid of some of our filters here. We can see that we've got these different time spans, right, that we've got here. So since I'm on hourly, I can only go back to the last 7. But if we go back to daily or monthly, I can start looking at my other spend in other ways. And so I mentioned here before, we've got this last 1 year to date look back, essentially our last 13 months worth of data. So again, just want to reiterate on the fact, cost and usage reports, very handy to have if you want to have a long historical view of your AWS spend. Get those set up when you get your AWS account created. Does have a minor charge to it for the data that you're going to be storing in S3 for those cost and usage reports, but may be really valuable to you in the long term to be able to go back and look back, 3 years ago what your AWS spend was and how well you've done on managing that cost that we're going to look at here in a little bit using some of the optimization strategies. But here we can see all these months worth of spend. Maybe we want to start looking into, again, a little bit more detail on where these increases and decreases are coming from. We want to look specifically at our compute because we mentioned we were going to look at compute. So we can take advantage of some of these other things like savings plans, reserved instances, reports, and budgets and stuff as well to understand those. And if you haven't used that, we're not going to cover a ton or go into really budgets and other items today, but you can set up reports and budgets within your AWS account as well in Cost Explorer. And those budgets might say, I only want to spend $100 a month on EC2 costs, and you can have a notification sent to you. If you start to get close to that budget, say at 50%, you want to send an alert to yourself. At 100%, you want to send an alert to yourself. And you can use the budget reports and stuff to send notifications to, say, account owners to let them know what they've been spending on AWS. Cost anomaly detection, again, if you have spend, you can use it to help you identify spend anomalies in your AWS account. You can look at the right sizing recommendations that we'll talk about a little bit later. But then we have all the savings plans and reservations that we'll also cover as we go into this. But before we start using savings plans or reservations, we need to understand kind of our EC2 cost. And so we're going to go and look at some of our EC2 instance and EC2 other, which kind of relate categorically to each other, that they're what makes up your total spend for EC2. And we can see, month after month, this is what we have. And I go to service or any of these other ones, say usage type, I can start to see a little bit more information about my EC2 spend, like EBS volumes, GB2, GP3, specific instance types that I'm using. And then, of course, that categorical other is there as well. But say I was in the middle of doing a GP2 to GP3 migration. I could use this to see how much of a dent I'm making in my migration by seeing also how much I've saved potentially going from GP2 to GP3 on my EC2 instance cost or underneath EC2 other. And so we can kind of use this chart within here to start looking at each individual area that makes up my EC2 or my compute costs in EC2. So we have all that data again in the other. Clint was mentioning too. You can download that thing, be able to come in and really manipulate that data after that, make your own charts if you want to create a presentation for your stakeholders to understand, what the spend is like. As a technical account manager, I've used this download CSV for my customers' information to make charts for them. It's really handy to be able to do so because, as we mentioned previously, as technical account managers, we really strive to make sure that our customers run operationally efficient and at the lowest cost that they can in AWS. So I'll go in and look at their spend and see if I can find anomalies for them, make recommendations on where they can lower costs. So if I came in here and didn't see GP3, that may be an area that I would mention for them to look at. Like, may consider looking at GP3 over GP2. May look at the instance types and see that they have T2 large here and make a suggestion for them to look at, T3s or T3A instances, which is our AMD specific T3 instance, and start seeing, if they can do some cost savings through instance modernization as well. So cost savings isn't always just buying savings plans or reserved instances. It can be as simple as using a newer generation of an EC2 instance or storage volume to help reduce cost as well there. So lots of different areas that we can kind of look at. We can go to API operations, see some things like map gateway, instance hours charged in there, and other items. So lots of different views that we can see. You can even see availability zones. So if I wanted to make sure that I had instances in different availability zones, I can group it by that. Just to get a quick overview of where I have EC2 instances in different regions, different AZs. You can see that again in this detailed data below as well. So lots of different things you can see within Cost Explorer. So just kind of wanted to share some of those that we see pretty easily available. Tagging. So this is my own account. I know where all the spend comes from. But for users, we highly recommend if you have multiple people in your account, or you just want to understand if you have several different projects and it's your own account, you can use tagging in here as well to be able to view spend based on tag. So if you had an organization, say IT or finance or one of your production applications, you could give it by the app name. And then that way you'd be able to filter your AWS spend by, say, app. I'm going to do by name, since that's the only tag I really use to name things. And we can see some different, things that have specific tags as well. But if I had more, I could choose different ones from here instead as well. So lots of options, lots of ways to kind of go through this data. Again, seeing the same thing we saw before, the usage type and instances, getting into this other. If we wanted to really just focus in on just GP2 and start to see just individual things, we can use these usage types over here. And say instead we wanted to look at our data transfer. So we wanted to understand what our data transfer looks like. Again, this isn't a production account, it's my own, so this is going to be pretty small. But we can come in and we can filter specifically to just data transfer. Let's say for data transfer out bytes, just go to the generic instead of specific region and find just out bytes. There we go. And I'll just be able to see, what usage I have for data transfer out, which is basically data going from EC2 to the internet. I can see daily, see little spikes. So it said for my account, not super interesting, but if you wanted to be able to get this daily view and see an increased charge in data transfer out and be able to identify that, on what day did you see this spike in your cost for your internet out traffic, you can use Cost Explorer to help give you that granularity to be able to see. Again, if it was in the last 7 days, you could switch to the last 7 days. This falls outside of it, so it's going to be very flat. But we can see that, it's not within that bound. But we can go back and kind of get some other views and be able to see some different information about where the cost came from, how much data transfer out, and that usage there. A bunch of different filters, right, we can apply to get very much kind of the same data and just validate what we're looking at for things. So one other question I get from customers a lot is this EC2 other, right? So we see in the bill in Cost Explorer sometimes that EC2 other is a big cost item because, as I mentioned before, it supports all the EC2 instances that we have running, and it includes things like your storage, NAT gateway hours. It includes data transfer between availability zones and out of the region and stuff. So let's take a little bit of additional look at just EC2 other. If I just choose EC2 other as a service, I just see one big blob of my spend in my account. But we can see if I include by instance or by usage type, we can see, again, storage. We can start to see daily. We can start to see a little bit more granularity on what my usage looks like and that I have a decrease in usage. Say just the current month, I want to see what my actually usage is over the day so I can start to track if what work I've done in my account to reduce spend is actually working. So a lot of different things we can see here within this. So again, I've been talking for a little while, so I want to stop and check with Clint, see if there's any questions from the audience as well.
There has been a couple of questions that have come through there, Rob, and you brought up something interesting there within Cost Explorer, because I don't necessarily think that people realize that you can determine which AZs, or what I like to call AZ diversity, within a region. You can actually get to that level. So to make sure that you're utilizing a region to the fullest of its capability, the way that I like to explain that to customers is, imagine purchasing a house, right? Your house has, 6, 7, 8 rooms inside of it. You don't live just in one single room. You don't eat, sleep, drink all in one room, right? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You want to use all the rooms in the house to maximize all square footage, right? Yep. So think of a region within AWS in that same way. So within US East 1, for example, there's 6 availability zones. You should be trying to utilize or architect your application and your VPC and your subnets so that you're taking full advantage of all rooms in the house, AKA that region. That's going to not only give you, overall better performance from an application redundancy perspective, things go bump in the night. I've got instances or my application running inside of other AZs within that region. Also from an instance perspective, if there's ever scenarios where you're trying to, introduce new instances and things of that nature into the mix, it gives you much more flexibility whenever you're building your applications.
Mm-hmm. Yep, for sure.
Cool. So the other topic, Rob, that's come up from RoboQuit, the MERMs, and this is EPON. I apologize if I said that incorrectly. Is around instance sizes, and do I scale up or do I scale out? Mm-hmm. Right? Do I have many small instances, or do I have like one big large instance that can handle everything? Wanted to have a conversation around that for a few minutes.
Yeah.
What's your opinion there?
Depends on the workload, right? It's going to be highly dependent on that. Of course, one single big instance to everything gives you one single big point of failure. So if that's a risk you're not willing to take, then of course, going back to the whole availability zone diversification conversation that we were just talking about 2 seconds ago, right? Being able to have multiple instances, you can spread them across multiple availability zones. So if your workload, say, if you're running web services or something like that, or you've got a distributed application that you're running, if you have that one singular big instance, sure, it might be able to do all of your workload, but how much of an interruption does that cause if you need to, say something happens with the OS on that one? Whereas if you have multiple instances, smaller ones, you can spread the workload across, kind of get into that whole shuffle sharding that we've kind of previously talked about, where you can build resiliency into your application using multiple instances and distribute workloads like that. So really depends on the workload. I'm a big fan of being able to horizontally scale things, especially for web services. Makes it really nice to be able to use, say, things like EFS or FSX, for shared storage, that you can have your configuration management done through automation, but all of your content is stored in one central location. So you've got easy access to it.
It definitely depends on the workload. So the first sort of like pushback that I would give there is, I would even ask, is EC2 the right platform to be running your application inside of? Depending, what it is. Obviously, this goes on a case-by-case basis, but if it's very like code centric, whether it be like a .NET sort of, or maybe it's like Node.js or a Python application, is that something that could be or containerized or even run inside of a Lambda, where you're only paying for the compute time that the code is actually executing? Again, it depends on the application. I would then sort of push back on, is that something that needs to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? So even though it may be, an EC2 intensive application, is that something that I can shut down or scale down during non-hours or power off on the weekends? We have a solution out there that's based upon AWS tags. It's called the Instant Scheduler. Once Rob kicks along here, I'll grab the link to that momentarily. But basically what that does is it runs on EventBridge schedule that you configure based upon tags that you add to EC2 instances, and it'll stop and start them on the schedule. So if it's dev environment, you can save significant amount of money by powering things off whenever they're not needed. But it obviously depends on the application. And I think the most important takeaway from that question is sort of like test it out, just knowing what options are available. Throw it behind a load balancer. Is that something that's supported? What is the application vendor itself? Can I run it in a Lambda? Is it something that can be containerized? There's lots of different options there.
Yeah. It's a very unfortunately difficult question to give a straight answer to, because there are a lot of other number of factors that play into it. So definitely availability being one of them for sure. So that's that. Thanks, appreciate it. All right, I'll continue on here through. Just got a little bit more that I want to show in the Cost Explorer, as well as we get going in here, right? Seeing some of these different individual items that we have for our volume usage and stuff like that within these. So again, as I mentioned before, if I was doing a GP3 migration, I could easily use this to track that and also provide back to my stakeholders and such what kind of cost savings we've seen. So nice to be able to see that. And that also kind of gives you a little dissection of what this whole EC2 other makes up for your AWS accounts. So take all my filters off here. You can see all my just regular usage back again. Can again see overall service usage is at a high level, my top spending items. And that's kind of the general overview of Cost Explorer and kind of what we wanted to show as far as dissecting spend. But I wanted to spend just a quick second, because I mentioned we're going to go under understanding, but we're also going to be able to look at some of the savings options that we have here. And so one of the offerings we have for cost savings within EC2 that goes beyond Spot is compute savings plans, or EC2 instance savings plans, right? Or just savings plans in general, I'll call them. And we can use savings plans to make a commitment to our EC2 spend. So this is going to be, if you have a regular workload, say that you've built out to your production environment, you're going to need X amount of EC2 instances or compute hours for that production application to consistently work. Well, you're going to be able to take advantage of either a 1 year, a 3 year, all upfront, partials, no upfronts, to kind of help you to save overall EC2 spend, right? By looking at that needed cost that you have for your production environment, and then saying, I need this. It's something I'm going to use. I'm going to get some savings on this as well by committing to a savings plan. Nice thing about compute savings plans, it not only covers the EC2, but like Clint and I were discussing, maybe EC2 isn't the right workload or right home for your workload. Maybe it is in Lambda, maybe it's in Fargate. Compute savings plans cover all of those. So it's just general compute resources. So a helpful way that once you've kind of identified your spend, what you want to do in order to start saving spend is being able to leverage some of these and see these different instance hour commitments, right? You have these, you'd be able to come in and use the utilization report. We, of course, do have reserved instances that are available that you can use for EC2 still if you want to, but we also have them available to other services like RDS or a relational database service, Elasticache. I don't have any RDS in this account. You have a little bit of Redshift in this account, so I wanted to show that, where I'd be able to purchase to save then also on, say, my Redshift clusters that I have as well, and help reduce cost on those resources. So that's kind of general all of Cost Explorer. So I'm going to switch back over to my deck here, and we're going to talk a little bit more about optimizing and being able to kind of save some. So optimization is an important factor. It's something I consistently try and work on with my customer to make sure that they optimize their costs. And here's a few examples of some customers that have been doing cost optimization in AWS. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the tools that they've used to support here, where they mentioned they've used Cost Explorer to tell them exactly where our money's being spent, getting specific EC2 analysis and looking at EC2 spot instances and auto scaling and such with them, being able to use Compute Optimizer that Clint mentioned as well earlier, to be able to identify cost savings opportunities based on their actual EC2 usage. And so the things we want to make sure that you understand as you're getting through using your EC2 is being able to select the right purchase model, right? We have on demand, we have spot instances, right? We have those savings plans that we're mentioning. So if you're not familiar with EC2 spot instances, they're basically capacity that you could use on EC2 at a reduced rate based on availability. So they're great for stateless workloads. You can do them with stateful workloads with a little extra work, but they're available for that right to be used. So um, by choosing that right option of either on demand for your consistent workload and then covering that with savings plans for bursty, spiky workloads, say you've got jobs that run 2 times a day and they last for a couple hours, maybe you spin up some spot instances to get potentially up to a 90% savings per hour on that EC2 compute. Um, and so that's going to be kind of a helpful way that you can start to look once you understand your workload, how you can, reduce the cost on those workloads as well. Um, Match capacity with demand, right? That's going to be the big part where you want to make sure that you have the right compute resources for what your users are going to be using and not too much. So typical in legacy on-premises environments, right? You'd have a physical server that you had to use and you had to buy for your peak load. So if you had an event that was coming up, you had to make sure you had 15 actual physical servers to host that, or most of the year maybe use 7. Um, we can use that capacity on demand with auto scaling to be able to scale out resources dynamically. So the whole elasticity of the cloud thing, right? Being able to use auto scaling to give you those compute resources. The nice thing about auto scaling is you can also pair that with spot instances. So we've talked previously, I don't think we have a link maybe for this previous episode. We talked about using spot instances as well with auto scaling. And you've got some different models that you can use with that, where you can use whether you're going to be capacity optimized or savings optimized, right? Help you focus mostly on keeping it as low price as you possibly can. So auto scaling going to be another key that once you know your compute resources and your spend, how you can help to reduce those in the long run. And then simplify and optimize resource selection, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about Trusted Advisor, but it's going to be able to help you to reduce some of your costs as well. It's like low utilization EC2. Compute Optimizer is going to be another key one that you can use. So with Compute Optimizer, if you're not familiar, say you've got a C5 12XL that you have out in your environment. It's doing work for you. You think everything is optimized there. You can go into Compute Optimizer and it can tell you, all right, you might have some potential cost savings because while you're using a C5 12X, you might actually be able to run your workload on C5 8X instead. Or it might just be, hey, you're using a C5 12X. Have you looked at a C5A? Something, just because of the shared cost savings that you can see with some of the AMD instances, it might make you a recommendation there. The nice thing about it is it will also give you that recommendation, but it will tell you, say you're using 5% CPU utilization on that C5, right? Well, that's not a whole lot of CPU utilization. If you were to downsize to a C5 8XL, maybe it tells you when you downsize to that, now you're going to use 21% of your CPU overall. If that's something that's acceptable for you with your application to have 21% CPU used on that instance, then maybe it'll save you a few $100s. Maybe it can save you a few $1,000s depending on the instance that it's making recommendations for. So Compute Optimizer, great tool to be able to use to see and optimize your spend. As Clint mentioned as well, if you have the CloudWatch agent installed and you're funneling the memory metrics to the default namespace in CloudWatch, it will also take memory into account in Compute Optimizer. And that way, it's not just looking at your compute, it'll look at your compute and memory and make recommendations based on that. Cost Explorer has its own EC2 right sizing recommendations as well. It's based on the same recommendation engine as Compute Optimizer. So should give you very similar recommendations there for your instances. I like to use this with my customers when I'm building reports, say looking at their trusted advisor information for underutilized EC2 instances, and then compare that to the EC2 right sizing recommendation and say, okay, these are a good recommendation that makes sense for them to save, maybe not by getting rid of the instance because they are actually using it, but it makes sense for them to downsize the instance to save costs. So like to make sure we look at those and try and help customers reduce on that. Just a little bit more on optimize and save, right? Combining those different purchase models, using those savings plans, using on-demand instances, using spot instances all together to be able to reduce your cost as much as possible. So we've got a lot of different options, right? Just reiterating on those again, Compute Optimizer, Instance Discovery. Do you want to talk a little about this one? So we haven't covered Instance Discovery. If you've used autoscaling in the past, maybe before you just told it, I want T3A, large or something like that instance in there, and you just told it what you wanted, and you had to make that kind of decision. We've changed kind of the CPU memory recommendation stuff where you can just tell it, I need 2 vCPU and 8 gig of memory or something like that. And it'll come back and it'll make this whole discovery of all the instances that match that kind of workload and give you those options to choose from those as well now as you get going through the auto scaling configuration. That way you don't have to come in mind and say, I know for sure. It'll also help you in diversifying across spot pools as well, because you'll be able to use that to say all of these instance families meet the minimum requirements that I have for my workload. And by using EC2 Spot across the different instance families, you'll increase the chance that you'll be able to get a Spot instance for a longer amount of time and help you kind of diversify across that and save costs that way as well. So definitely a good option looking at the kind of instance discovery. And so Trusted Advisor, want to just touch on that. It's something that's near and dear to my heart, using Trusted Advisor for customers, being able to see and look and help you optimize your AWS, not only in spend, right, but it's going to make security recommendations for you, fault tolerance, performance as well. We're a little bit focused on the cost today, so I just wanted to show you all the different available areas that we have for Trusted Advisor for cost optimization. We talked about EC2, right, for those instance optimizations. It's going to also make reserved instance. It's going to be low utilization Amazon EC2 instances, idle load balancers. So if they have no backend targets or no healthy backend targets, it's going to make recommendations for those. Underutilized Amazon EBS volumes. You can also use Compute Optimizer to look at your EBS volumes as well. So it's another thing that not only just compute that can be done in Compute Optimizer, but EBS volumes as well. But all these things have cost to them. And so Trusted Advisor will help you to be able to view and look over this material so that you can really understand your AWS spend, start to look through that whole, once you've identified spend, where you can optimize at. So with that, Clint, I'm going to check to see if there's any questions from the audience again. But that's pretty much all that I have for today. So,
yeah. Hey, Rob. So we don't have any recent questions that have come in through the chat. However, you've brought up a few different topics there along the way. So we have a little bit of fun here for a few minutes. Please feel free. Right. Throw your questions in the chat there. So, Rob, the first thing that you had mentioned there was changing instance sizes, right? Yep. So I have a question for the audience. This is a true or false question, right? So get ready with your T or F. I don't have any prizes. I'm sorry. Maybe we can work that out for next time. But true or false, you can change the instance size while the instance is started. We'll give 15 seconds. You can change the instance size while the instance is running. True or false? Don't be shy. Let's see here. True or false? You can change the instance size while the instance is running. So we have 2 answers, 3 answers. Thank you so much for participating there.
Yes.
Let's see here. So the answer is false. You must stop the instance prior to changing the instance size. That's not something that can be done on the fly.
A clever thing you can do if you're using auto scaling, though, right? So if you do need to increase, say you need to vertically scale across your fleet, keep in mind you can change the launch template size and then do an instance refresh in auto scaling, and you would end up with larger instances. But yeah, on the fly, unfortunately, you can't modify the instance size.
Right. Okay, Rob. So the second topic that you brought up there was Spot, and for those that might not be familiar, Spot is basically excess capacity of instance sizes that we have within all the different AWS regions and availability zones that we sell on the cheap, much and highly discounted, sometimes up to like 90% discount, right? So the question that I have for y'all, this is a number answer. How many minute notification does the instance emit? So the instance will emit an event. How many minutes before it is going to be interrupted?
A good one.
It is a number.
To know too. Yeah.
We do have a few answers coming in. A few of them say 2. Does anybody else think otherwise? Here is so we have 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 0 minutes, 2 to 5 minutes. Rob, do you know the answer?
2 minutes is going to be your notification for an EC2 spot interruption, but take advantage of lifecycle events of that. So I was mentioning before, if you wanted to have something happen, you get that 2-minute notification event bus, and that way, or event bridge, and that way you can do stuff. So if you want to take a snapshot of that image before it actually goes away, or export some data, take advantage of those instance lifecycles.
So that's an interesting topic here. Let's talk about that just for a few seconds then. So you've got a Spot instance that's running, some best practices, Rob, from your perspective, around running Spot. What sort of workload is a good use case for Spot?
So stateless workloads make it easier. That means that you basically, even if you're using for web services, say you're going to persist user state session like in Elasticache or something else outside of the actual instance. That way, it doesn't matter if the instance goes away, right? Nothing is stored actually on that. It's kind of ephemeral in nature. But like I mentioned, you can do it with it because of the fact that you're going to get 2 minutes. As long as you're not storing a exponentially large amount of data on the instance itself, maybe you just want to capture local log files within that 2-minute termination window, right? You're going to be able to have an event notify say a Lambda to do something, or just something else that's going to influence what happens when that instance goes into that actual, stopping state. So.
Right. So a few of them batch processing. One user in the chat says works with workloads that can withstand interruption. The other one here from Pew Boom, can one bid the regular instance hourly rate, so your instance never gets terminated because presumably the bid never exceeds the hourly rate. Sort of talk us through there with the Spot bid process. I know there's been some changes there recently.
Yeah, so typically you don't have to really work. So in the way that I usually recommend to people is not to worry about the bid price, right, necessarily, because you're not going to get charged more of the on-demand price for it. If you're more concerned about interruption in the workload, it's probably a little bit of change to the actual workload to make it work really well with Spot. So that goes into leveraging it with auto-scaling. If you use capacity optimize, it's going to do its best to give you instances that historically are going to be available more readily for you, right? So if you wanted to focus on bidding, actual bids itself, right, like you still can do so. Say if you're using a launch configuration instead of a launch template, you can set your bid price and try and make sure that you don't have interruption. But yeah, that's kind of the general, I guess, on choosing some stuff with Spot.
So one comment around Sophia 007. So you can get RI. So reserved instance does not reserve capacity, right? So there's a caveat there is if you have a zonal RI that does, which it's specifically targeted at a AZ, right? However, if you do need to reserve capacity, and Rob alluded to this a little bit earlier, you should be utilizing something that we have within the console called on-demand capacity reservation, ODCR, where you can go in and basically say, hey, I need this instance size or this instance type for X amount of period, and regardless if you use it or not, that capacity is reserved on that account's behalf where you paid for it, right? So you're guaranteed the capacity. The other item that I would sort of tie back to here with EC2 specifically, you shouldn't be utilizing RIs. You should be looking at savings plans. They're the more modern, more flexible route for reserving or prepaying for compute. So it's the same exact terms, 1 or 3 year commit, all upfront, no upfront, partial upfront. The difference is you're committing on an hourly rate, so like $12 per hour. Right, so you can have a compute savings plan that's focused on EC2 or Fargate that you're committing to spending $12 an hour, and in exchange for committing for that rate, we give you savings. Right, that's how that works.
Yeah, that's really helpful if you have, say, if you were to previously when you had reserved instances only, you specified exactly what instance type you wanted, like instance family and generation. So if you bought a C5 12XL. Like reserved instance, you could use smaller C5s, but you could then quickly and easily move to like an M5 if you decided to change instance families altogether. But like I was saying, with the compute savings plans, it's flexible across instance families, so you could go from a C to an M to an R to T, whatever. You're just paying for compute hours.
Yep. So the services where RIs would still be applicable is for like SageMaker, Redshift, RDS, for example. Those are just a few of the ones that I can think of off the top of my head where RIs would still be applicable. Or Elasticache.
Yep.
Cool. I don't see. So does that mean I can bid, say, the regular instance rate of $0.2 per hour? Then I will always be charged the respective bid, which is usually much lower. Any clarification around the spot there based on how much they bid to how much they pay?
I'm not 100% sure on that fact, because I think
I'm not
if you,
either. Yeah.
yeah, I think if you set like the regular instance rate of like what the on-demand is rate, like obviously you would just have the on-demand rate. If you set it lower, whatever your bid price is, it's good for the term of that bid price before someone either were to outbid you or to take the capacity, right? Because they're willing to pay on demand for it. So um, it's not a guarantee at that cost rate, right? So if you put in a bid, you're not always going to have that instance at that bid until somebody else comes along and is willing to pay essentially what the on-demand would be for it.
Right. Cool. So, Sophia, this show, what we call AWS Supports You, airs every Monday from 2 to 3 p.m. EST. We look forward to seeing you back next week. Today, we discussed at great length with Principal TAM Rob Higuerita, who's based out of Austin, Texas, about understanding EC2 costs. We talked about Cost Explorer, cost and usage reports, spot instances, EC2 right size and compute optimizer. Lots of good details provided today. Please, if you like the show, not only come back next week, but fill out our survey. Give us feedback on how you think we're doing in the show. We greatly appreciate that. And then if we haven't answered any of your questions, or if you think of any other questions after the fact, please head over to repost.aws, which is basically the AWS forums, where experts like Rob and myself are standing by to answer your questions. Also, feel free, you can email us at awssupportsyou@amazon.com. We look forward to seeing you next week when we're going to be discussing AWS Trusted Advisor features. Thanks for joining us here at AWS Supports You, and happy cloud computing.
Happy cloud computing, everyone.